Hey there folks, you're watching Animal Quest, and today I'm covering some of the most horrific pet attacks ever recorded in America. From a former trainer's final confrontation with his grown chimpanzee, to a man's exotic animal obsession leading him into the jaws of his prized lion. It was February 4th, 2017, when winter cold gripped the Appalachian Mountains of West Virginia. Snow covered the ground around the isolated cabin where Callaway Riggs, a 33-year-old unemployed mechanic, had lived alone for the past 18 months. In the converted garage behind the cabin, 3 wolf-dog hybrids paced their reinforced kennel area, their breath visible in the freezing air. Riggs had acquired them as 8-week-old puppies in spring 2014 from a Montana breeder, paying $1,200 each. Genetic testing would later confirm a high percentage of wolf DNA, making them functionally closer to wild wolves than domestic dogs. Now nearly 3 years old, each weighed between 90 and 110 pounds. The property sat at the end of a 3-mile dirt road that became impassable in heavy snow. Riggs had purchased the cabin before his marriage collapsed, drawn to the isolation as a refuge. His ex-wife told investigators he had grown obsessed with the animals, prioritizing their care over human relationships and dismissing her concerns about their growing aggression. His divorce had been finalized 14 months earlier. The converted garage provided roughly 600 square feet, connected to an outdoor run enclosed by reinforced chain-link fencing. Riggs fed the animals raw meat and deer carcasses despite being largely unemployed. His county required special permits for hybrid canines, permits Riggs had never obtained. His nearest neighbors lived over a mile away. Wolf-dog hybrids are particularly difficult to manage due to wolf pack behavior, combined with reduced fear of humans. High-content hybrids retain complex pack hierarchies and territorial aggression, with powerful jaws capable of crushing bone. Pack dynamics can produce coordinated aggression targeting the throat and legs. Unlike domestic dogs, they rarely develop submissive behaviors. Multiple fatal attacks have involved hybrids turning on owners, particularly when pack dynamics shift. Evidence suggested recent aggression between 2 of the males in the days prior. Neighbors reported intense howling and snarling during the 3 nights preceding the attack. On the afternoon of February 4th, at approximately 2:30 p.m., Riggs entered the garage area carrying food. Physical evidence suggested the 2 male hybrids were engaged in an aggressive confrontation when he arrived, consistent with a dominance conflict within the pack hierarchy. Blood found on the concrete floor indicated at least one animal had sustained injuries during the conflict before Riggs's arrival. Rather than waiting for the animals to separate naturally, Riggs appears to have made the decision to enter the enclosure and physically intervene. He had done so successfully on previous occasions according to evidence of his handling methods, but investigators noted that pack dynamics among wolves and high-content hybrids can shift rapidly and unpredictably. The moment Riggs stepped between the fighting animals, the pack dynamic apparently changed. Both fighting males redirected their aggression toward him, likely perceiving his intervention as a threat or challenge. The third hybrid, triggered by the sudden pack activity, joined the attack within seconds. The assault came from multiple angles. Injury patterns documented during the autopsy indicated multiple animals attacking simultaneously, with severe wounds to his legs that caused him to fall and catastrophic damage to his throat and neck that likely damaged major blood vessels. The attack was frenzied and sustained, with all 3 animals inflicting injuries across his body. Injury patterns and the extent of tissue damage throughout the enclosure suggested the attack had been prolonged and violent. The animals eventually disengaged and retreated to different areas of the enclosure once the aggression subsided. A distant neighbor checking on the property after noticing Riggs hadn't collected his mail for 3 days discovered the scene on February 7th. The neighbor had become concerned when he drove past and noticed the mailbox overflowing, unusual for Riggs, who typically checked it daily. He found Riggs's body on the enclosure floor, the 3 wolf-dog hybrids resting at the far end of the run. Emergency services and animal control arrived within an hour of the discovery, but Riggs had been dead for several days. The 3 wolf-dog hybrids were tranquilized and subsequently euthanized due to the severity of the attack and the impossibility of safely relocating animals that had killed a human. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and determined that the victim's decision to physically intervene in the pack fight had likely triggered the fatal attack. Investigators noted that proper safety protocols would have required Riggs to remain outside the enclosure and use noise or water to separate the fighting animals rather than physical intervention. The medical examiner determined that severe neck trauma had caused massive blood loss, with death resulting from a combination of blood loss and damage to his airway. It was August 16th, 2014, and the afternoon sat still inside a small house in Portland, Oregon, where a large animal moved freely through narrow rooms that were never meant to contain it. The space was quiet, but it wasn't controlled. Tight hallways, low furniture, and close distance left no room to step back once movement started. Nora Castellanos, 29, lived in a rented house on the outskirts of Portland, Oregon, where neighbors had already raised concerns about a large animal on the property. The lion, Pip, had been acquired as a cub through an illegal sale and kept hidden as he grew, mostly indoors with a makeshift enclosure. By around 18 months old and nearly 180 pounds, the situation had drawn attention, but no removal had taken place due to the complaints being anonymous or vague. Nora had no formal training and relied on routine handling in a space never designed for an animal of that size. At that point, Pip was no longer behaving like a pet. Even without full maturity, he had the speed and reflexes of a predator, reacting instantly to movement. In tight spaces, lions don't stalk. They respond to sudden stimuli with short, explosive bursts, using their forelimbs to knock down and control before biting. In the weeks leading up to the incident, his behavior had shifted. He paced more in tight, repetitive paths and reacted sharply to small sounds, locking onto them longer than before. When Nora tried to redirect him, he resisted, pulling away or circling past her instead of stopping. That afternoon, he moved through the living room in tight, restless loops, cutting around the couch and back toward the hallway, again and again. His tail stayed low but tense, flicking in short, controlled movements. Each pass brought him closer to the same corners of the room, his attention shifting quickly with every small sound or movement. Nora stepped in multiple times, trying to interrupt the pacing by reaching for his collar and guiding him away from the walls, but he didn't settle. Instead, he moved around her, brushing past with more force than before, his body no longer slowing when she stepped into his path. Then a metal pan slipped from the kitchen counter and struck the floor. The sound was sharp and sudden. Pip reacted instantly, not cautiously, but with a full-body response. He snapped toward the noise, muscles tightening as he pivoted, his focus locking onto the movement and sound at once. Nora moved in at the same moment, grabbing his collar to pull him back. That overlap is what changed everything. Instead of disengaging, Pip redirected mid-motion. His body twisted sharply, and in a single burst, he lunged, not with hesitation, but with the same forward force used to take down prey at close range. His forelimb struck first, catching Nora high across the chest and shoulder, the impact knocking her backward into the edge of a table before she lost her footing. As she fell, he didn't pause. He followed through immediately, closing the gap in less than a second and coming down over her. One paw pressed down across her upper body while the other braced against the floor, stabilizing his position. The weight and speed of the impact drove the air out of her as she hit the ground. When she tried to push him off, the movement triggered a second response. He shifted his grip and went for the neck. The bite came in fast and direct, clamping along the side of her neck and shoulder. From that point, the behavior changed from reactive to controlled. Instead of repeated striking, he held position, keeping his weight forward, jaws locked, and body pressed down to limit movement. The room showed the impact. Furniture shifted, items knocked aside, but the struggle was brief. Each attempt she made to move was met with immediate force, leaving no space to break free. Within moments, her movement slowed. No one else was inside the house. A neighbor later reported hearing a loud crash and brief disturbance, but did not recognize it as an emergency. After Nora failed to answer repeated calls, a family member checked on her and found the house quiet. Emergency services were contacted. Officers approached cautiously and through the windows saw the lion still moving inside. They did not enter. A perimeter was established while animal control was called. When trained personnel arrived, they used a dart from outside near the doorway. The sedative took several minutes to take effect as the lion continued pacing before collapsing. Only after the animal was confirmed down did responders enter. Nora was found on the living room floor with severe injuries and no signs of life and was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities later confirmed the lion had been kept illegally, despite prior complaints. The animal was euthanized following the investigation. It was August 12, 2017, and the backyard of Miguel Rodriguez's sprawling ranch house in Homestead, Florida, was alive with the sounds of his 38th birthday celebration. 20 friends and family members had gathered around the custom-built swimming pool and the separate concrete enclosure that housed the party's most unusual attraction. Crusher, a 9-foot American alligator that Miguel had been keeping illegally for 5 years. The massive reptile rested in his own dedicated habitat, where guests could observe the apex predator from what they believed was a safe distance. Miguel had built his construction business from nothing, his success allowing him to indulge in increasingly exotic hobbies that included a collection of dangerous reptiles housed throughout his property. The alligator had started as a baby, purchased from a black market dealer who assured Miguel that the reptile would remain manageable if raised from infancy. 5 years later, Crusher had grown into a 200-pound apex predator whose presence at pool parties had become Miguel's signature entertainment, though several guests had stopped attending his gatherings due to safety concerns. The custom alligator enclosure featured reinforced concrete walls and a separate filtration system, designed to keep Crusher contained while allowing party guests to observe him safely. Miguel regularly hand-fed the alligator whole chickens during parties. American alligators are apex predators that have remained virtually unchanged for over 200 million years, perfectly adapted for their role as ambush hunters in aquatic environments. Adult males can reach lengths of 14 feet and weights exceeding 1,000 pounds, with jaw muscles capable of exerting over 3,000 pounds of pressure per square inch. Their bite force is among the strongest in the animal kingdom, capable of crushing turtle shells and breaking the bones of large mammals, while their signature death roll can disorient and drown prey much larger than themselves. The birthday party had been in full swing for several hours, with Miguel consuming numerous beers and shots of tequila, while entertaining his guests with stories about his various exotic pets. As the evening progressed, Miguel's intoxication led him to become increasingly reckless around Crusher's enclosure, leaning further over the walls and making jokes about the alligator's docile behavior. The tragedy began when Miguel decided to retrieve a beach ball that had blown into the area near Crusher's enclosure during a game of pool volleyball. The ball had landed on the narrow concrete ledge that surrounded the alligator's habitat, just inches from the water's edge where Crusher floated motionlessly. Miguel climbed onto the 18-inch wide concrete barrier, his alcohol-impaired balance making the simple task dangerous as he reached for the colorful ball. As Miguel stretched toward the beach ball, his unsteady footing caused him to lose his balance and tumble directly into Crusher's enclosure. The moment Miguel's body hit the water near the massive reptile, Crusher's predatory instincts took over completely, his brain registering the splashing and proximity as a feeding opportunity rather than recognizing his familiar caretaker. The alligator had been in a semi-dormant state, but the sudden disturbance triggered his lightning-fast reflexes. Crusher's massive jaws snapped shut on Miguel's torso with bone-crushing force, his 3,000 pounds of bite pressure instantly fracturing ribs and puncturing vital organs. The alligator immediately began his signature death roll, spinning rapidly in the water while maintaining his grip on Miguel's body. The violent rotation dislocated Miguel's shoulder and pulled him deeper underwater, where Crusher's natural advantages became overwhelming as his victim's lungs filled with water. The 20 party guests screamed in horror as they watched Miguel being dragged underwater by the massive alligator, the enclosure water turning red with blood as Crusher's death roll continued with mechanical precision. Several guests threw pool equipment and patio furniture at the alligator, but their desperate attempts to distract the reptile only seemed to intensify his aggressive behavior. Local sheriff's deputies arrived within 12 minutes of the first 911 call, but Crusher remained aggressive and protective of his kill, circling the enclosure with Miguel's lifeless body, while displaying territorial behavior that made any immediate intervention extremely dangerous. Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission officers arrived 25 minutes after the initial emergency call, but Crusher's continued aggression forced wildlife officers to shoot the massive alligator multiple times before they could safely recover Miguel's body. Miguel was pulled from the blood-stained water but was pronounced dead at the scene, his massive injuries making any resuscitation attempts futile. The investigation revealed that Miguel had been keeping Crusher illegally for years, violating multiple state and federal regulations regarding alligator ownership and residential exotic animal enclosures. It was July 18, 2018, when tragedy struck a private ranch in Coconino County, Arizona. The sprawling property, surrounded by towering ponderosa pines and red rock formations, had become home to an unlikely resident. Maura Blaine, a 32-year-old freelance photographer with a passion for wildlife, had purchased what she believed would be a lifelong companion, a cougar cub from an illegal breeder. What started as an innocent fascination with exotic animals would ultimately lead to a fatal encounter that shocked the local community. Blaine had moved to the remote ranch 3 years earlier, seeking solitude and inspiration for her wildlife photography work. She had spent months transforming a section of her ranch into what she considered a suitable habitat for her growing cougar. The enclosure, however, lacked proper safety protocols. There were no escape barriers, no overhead protection, and most critically, no secondary containment system that could separate humans and animal during maintenance. The photographer had documented her relationship with the cougar extensively, sharing images on social media that showed her in direct contact with the animal. As the cub matured into a powerful adult predator, Blaine continued her routine of close physical contact, hand feeding, and unrestricted access during cleaning periods. She was unknowingly conditioning a wild animal to associate human presence with territory and resources, while ignoring the mounting warnings from her own instincts. Local wildlife experts had previously warned about the dangers of private cougar ownership, but their concerns fell on deaf ears. The ranch's remote location meant that emergency response would be delayed, and the nearest trauma center was over an hour away. These factors would prove crucial when disaster finally struck. Cougars are North America's second-largest cat species and among the continent's most efficient predators. These solitary hunters possess incredible strength, with the ability to leap 40 feet horizontally and 15 feet vertically. Their muscular hindquarters generate explosive power, capable of taking down prey 5 times their size, while their retractable claws and powerful jaws make them perfectly designed killing machines. Adult cougars can weigh up to 220 pounds and measure 8 feet in length. Their bite is powerful enough to crush vertebrae and sever vital structures, concentrated through long, curved canine teeth designed to penetrate deep into prey. Despite being raised in captivity, their predatory instincts remain intact and can be triggered by movement, vulnerability, or territorial behavior. On that fateful summer morning, Blaine entered the enclosure alone to perform routine maintenance. Her partner remained outside the fence, planning to assist later. The temperature was already climbing, and she wanted to complete the work quickly. The cougar, now fully mature and weighing approximately 160 pounds, had been observing from the shadows of its shelter, tracking her every movement with predatory focus. As Blaine bent near the fence to adjust feeding equipment, she unknowingly triggered the animal's hunting response by presenting herself as vulnerable prey. Her back was turned, her attention focused on the task, and her body position mimicked that of a grazing animal, all classic triggers for a cougar's predatory instincts. The attack was swift and devastating. The cougar approached silently from behind, utilizing its natural stalking abilities. Its padded paws made no sound as it closed the distance. Without warning, it launched itself through the air, using its powerful hindquarters to propel its full body weight forward in a calculated strike. The impact knocked Blaine face first toward the fence, stunning her and preventing any chance of escape. Before she could react, the cougar's jaws clamped down on the back of her neck, its canine teeth penetrating deep into the cervical area with deadly precision. The animal's crushing bite force damaged the delicate structures of the upper spine. The cougar maintained its grip with methodical precision, applying sustained pressure that caused catastrophic cervical spine injury. This technique, perfected through countless generations of successful hunts, ensured rapid incapacitation of prey. Blaine's body went limp as high cervical trauma and vascular compression rapidly disrupted neurological and respiratory control. Her respiratory system began shutting down as the damaged spinal cord could no longer effectively transmit signals to her diaphragm. The cougar continued to hold its position, instinctively maintaining pressure until all movement ceased, following its programmed behavior. Her partner, hearing the sudden commotion and unnatural silence that followed, rushed to the enclosure but was powerless to intervene safely. Death occurred within minutes from the devastating cervical injuries and subsequent respiratory failure. Local authorities launched an immediate investigation into the incident, focusing on the illegal acquisition and housing of the dangerous animal. The cougar was subsequently euthanized by wildlife officials as relocation was deemed impossible. Blaine's death sparked renewed debate about private exotic animal ownership in Arizona, with lawmakers calling for stricter regulations and enhanced enforcement measures. It was April 17, 2016, in rural Brenham, Texas. The farm seemed calm under the midday heat, unaware that familiar routines between an owner and her stallion were quietly drifting toward a fatal turning point. June Carter, 38, ran a modest homestead where she kept a few chickens, a backyard garden, and a single stallion named Rowdy. She worked part-time at the county feed store and kept the property herself, treating the animals as companions rather than livestock. Rowdy had been hers since he was a colt. She'd raised him from weaning, trained him herself, and registered him in her name. Neighbors described her as hands-on and deeply attached. She groomed him daily, hand-fed treats, and preferred riding alone down quiet dirt lanes. The relationship was affectionate and familiar, and June's handling reflected years of trust that, over time, softened formal boundaries between owner and animal. She couldn't afford professional trainers, but Rowdy responded to her calmly, so she relied on their long bond. He lived in a small stall behind the barn, close enough for her to check on him throughout the day. He wasn't a working horse. He was her personal pet and companion. The barn was warm with hay and dust, and the narrow alley near his stall left little space to avoid a sudden push if he moved forward unexpectedly. Adult stallions are powerful animals, well over 1,000 pounds in large breeds, with a low center of gravity and strong hindquarters built for forward momentum. They can shift weight quickly and brace a flank against a surface to apply unrelenting pressure. When triggered, a stallion's natural forward thrust is slow but overwhelmingly heavy. It does not require speed to cause crushing force against a fixed object. Inexperienced handling, blurred human-animal boundaries, or misread body language can quickly turn a routine interaction into a dangerous entrapment. That spring, Rowdy grew more restless at feeding time, pawing at the stall floor and nudging June's legs when she delayed. Neighbors noticed him trailing her closely, and once saw him shove a gatepost during a brief dispute over fencing. June dismissed it as stubbornness. That morning, returning late from the feed store, she entered the narrow alley, unaware that Rowdy's posture had tightened behind her. As she bent, Rowdy moved forward with a steady, forceful step. The stallion's shoulder struck the small of her back, driving her weight forward so that she stumbled against the stall frame. The impact was not dramatic in sound, but it was decisive in force. June's torso met the wooden post, and Rowdy continued to press, angling his massive chest and neck in a slow, sustained shove, rather than repeated blows. Her arms hooked for support on the stall door. Her feet scrabbled for purchase on uneven straw. The neighbor, Eli, who was repairing a fence 10 yards away, heard a dull thud and a low, distressed sound. He looked up to see Rowdy braced, head lowered, body angled as he pushed June back against the stall wall. June tried to step to the side, but the alley's width allowed only minimal movement. Each attempt to lift herself triggered more pressure. Rowdy's mass did not surge so much as it settled, driving downward weight against her ribs and chest. The stallion's movements were steady, not frantic, an unrelenting application of force that compressed her torso against the timber. Eli crossed the yard and called out while grabbing a bucket handle to throw toward the stall in a bid to distract the horse. But the stallion's focus remained on the pinned figure. He reached the stable door and shoved at the animal's shoulder. Rowdy braced harder, shifting the crush point across June's chest. The compression impeded breathing. Observers later described her attempts to inhale as shallow, each breath harder than the last. June's arms went slack as rib motion became ineffective. Eli, joined by another neighbor, Ramona, tried to lever the stallion away by twisting a lead rope that had been looped on a nearby post, but Rowdy's weight and the narrow stall geometry prevented any immediate displacement. Within minutes, paramedics were on site after a frantic call. By then, June had lost consciousness. Medical responders performed extrication procedures and provided chest decompression efforts, but the prolonged compression had caused fatal internal trauma, multiple rib fractures, flail chest mechanics, and rapid internal bleeding. She was pronounced dead at the scene. June's phone was found on the barn floor with its screen cracked, an unfinished video file still open from when she had set it on a shelf before working. Her toolbox lay scattered. A few screws kicked loose during the struggle. Rowdy stood quietly in his stall, breathing heavily, but showing no predatory behavior when responders arrived. Witness statements and a brief, shaky neighbor video confirmed the slow, compressive force rather than a frantic attack. A veterinarian and animal control officers later determined the stallion's behavior stemmed from space and resource fixation, recommending transfer to a facility with experienced handlers. The coroner listed blunt thoracic trauma with internal hemorrhage as the cause of death. Local coverage remained minimal, noted only as a farm accident, but neighbors quietly adjusted their own barns. Wider aisles, clearer feeding zones, while the property carried the memory of a familiar routine that had turned irreversible within seconds. It was May 6, 2018 in Jacksonville, Florida. The morning sun cast long shadows across the suburban landscape, and the spring air was already thick with humidity, promising another long, sweltering Florida day ahead. In a quiet residential neighborhood lined with palm trees and Spanish moss gently swaying in the warm breeze, Rhea Mund was beginning her Sunday routine at home. 29-year-old Rhea worked as a veterinary technician at one of Jacksonville's busiest animal hospitals, handling everything from aggressive cats to injured birds of prey. Her true passion, however, was her personal collection of exotic reptiles, carefully kept in a converted garage behind her home. The garage had been transformed into a carefully controlled reptile habitat over several years. Enclosures lined the walls, each designed for specific species with precise temperature and humidity needs. Heat lamps provided basking spots, and automated misting systems maintained moisture. Ria's collection included several snakes, geckos, and her prized possession, a large Nile monitor lizard legally acquired under Florida regulations. The monitor occupied the largest enclosure, a custom-built habitat dominating one wall. The animal had been with her for 3 years, growing from a manageable juvenile into an impressive adult. Recently, she had noticed it becoming more defensive during maintenance, often whipping its powerful tail and lunging when she cleaned. The flooring around the habitat consisted of large ceramic tiles, easy to sanitize but dangerously slippery when wet. The misting system ran every few hours and water often accumulated despite her efforts to keep the area dry and safe to walk on. That Sunday morning, Ria planned to deep clean the monitor's enclosure before work. The routine felt second nature after years of reptile keeping, but she was running late. As she gathered supplies and approached the enclosure, she failed to notice the wet floor left by the recent misting cycle. Nile monitor lizards are among Africa's largest lizards, capable of exceeding 6 feet in length. They possess muscular bodies, sharp claws, and whip-like tails used for defense. In the wild, they are apex predators capable of subduing sizable prey. Monitors are highly intelligent and can recognize their keepers, yet remain fundamentally wild. When threatened, their responses are swift and forceful. Their tails can deliver bone-breaking strikes, and their bites can cause serious lacerations. The species is naturally wary of humans and often interprets sudden movement as danger. During enclosure cleaning, monitors may become agitated by territorial intrusion, displaying tail whipping, lunging, or biting. Their powerful limbs allow surprising speed across surfaces. Ria's fatal mistake came when she entered the enclosure area and attempted manual restraint without first securing the animal or addressing the wet flooring. As she reached toward the monitor to guide it into a holding area, the lizard perceived the motion as a threat. Its muscular tail whipped forward with tremendous force, striking her knee and sending shockwaves of pain through her leg, throwing her off balance. Her feet slipped on the wet ceramic tiles, and she fell backward toward the concrete base of the enclosure system. The sudden movement startled the monitor further. It lunged and bit her forearm, its sharp teeth puncturing the skin and leaving bleeding wounds, but almost immediately released and retreated to the far corner, frightened rather than continuing the attack. The bite wounds were painful but not life-threatening. As Ria tried to stand, her shoe found no traction on the slick surface. Her foot slipped again, and she fell backward with greater force. The back of her skull struck the hard concrete base with devastating impact. The sound echoed sharply through the garage like a gunshot. The blow caused immediate, catastrophic traumatic brain injury. Ria lost consciousness instantly. Her body went limp, motionless on the wet floor. The monitor, now thoroughly frightened, remained hidden in its corner, showing no further aggression. Blood pooled beneath her head where her skull had fractured against the concrete. The injury proved fatal, though her heart continued beating for several minutes before stopping. When a coworker arrived an hour later for a planned visit, she found Ria's lifeless body on the garage floor. Jacksonville authorities conducted a thorough investigation and found all permits and enclosures compliant with state regulations. The Nile monitor was relocated to a licensed reptile sanctuary. The medical examiner determined Ria died from traumatic brain injury caused by the fall, not from the monitor's bite. The bite wounds were minor and non-contributory. Local media emphasized the accidental nature of the tragedy and the risks of keeping large reptiles. Ria's colleagues expressed shock, describing her as knowledgeable and safety-conscious. Her family released a statement acknowledging her passion while urging caution with exotic animals. The incident sparked discussions within Florida's herpetological community about improved safety protocols for large monitor species. It was March 18, 2014, and the elegant dining room of Robert and Linda Harrison's colonial home in Stamford, Connecticut, was set for an intimate dinner party with Robert's co-workers from the insurance company, where he worked as a senior adjuster. The mahogany table gleamed under the crystal chandelier, while Linda made final preparations for the evening, unaware that Bruno, the 140-pound chimpanzee who had been part of their family for 8 years, was growing increasingly agitated in his basement enclosure as unfamiliar voices filled the house above. At 52, Linda was a recently retired registered nurse who had dedicated her career to caring for others. First her patients, and then Bruno, whom she treated like the child she had never had. She dressed the chimpanzee in human clothes and included him in family activities, despite Robert's growing concerns about Bruno's increasing size and strength. Linda refused to acknowledge that Bruno had become unpredictable and potentially dangerous as he reached full maturity, dismissing his occasional aggressive displays as normal behavior for an intelligent animal. The Harrison home had been extensively modified to meet Connecticut's post-2009 primate regulations, with reinforced enclosures, double lock systems, and secure barriers separating Bruno's living area from the main house. However, Linda had grown increasingly lax about following the strict containment protocols, often allowing Bruno into the main house when she believed no one would discover the violations. Chimpanzees are among the strongest primates on Earth, with adult males possessing the strength of 5 grown men and the ability to inflict devastating injuries with their powerful hands and sharp teeth. Despite their intelligence and capacity for learning human behaviors, chimpanzees remain wild animals with unpredictable temperaments and strong territorial instincts. Adult chimps can become extremely aggressive when they feel threatened or when their social hierarchy is challenged, their attacks often targeting the face, hands, and genitals of their victims with surgical precision. The dinner party had been proceeding normally in the main house, with 6 guests enjoying Linda's carefully prepared meal, while Bruno remained hidden in the basement recreation room. However, the presence of strangers in his territory, combined with the sounds of animated conversation filtering down from above, began to stress Bruno beyond his tolerance level. As the evening progressed and wine flowed freely, the dinner conversation became more boisterous, with several guests laughing loudly and gesturing animatedly. The noise carried throughout the house, reaching Bruno in the basement, where his agitation grew with each burst of unfamiliar laughter. Linda had been checking on Bruno periodically throughout the evening, but during her final visit, she found him pacing frantically and displaying clear signs of territorial aggression. The sounds of strangers in his domain had triggered his protective instincts, and his stress levels had reached a dangerous peak that Linda failed to recognize. Instead of immediately securing Bruno in his regulation enclosure or calling for help, Linda made the fatal decision to try calming him with physical contact. She approached the agitated chimpanzee and wrapped her arms around him in what she believed was a soothing embrace, her maternal instincts overriding the obvious danger signals that Bruno was broadcasting. The attack was swift and brutal, driven by instincts that 8 years of human contact had never eliminated. Bruno's powerful hands, each capable of crushing bones, gripped Linda's head and shoulders while his teeth tore into her face, opening severe lacerations across her cheeks, forehead, and around her eyes. The 140-pound chimpanzee's strength was overwhelming, and Linda had no chance to defend herself against an animal that possessed 5 times her physical power. Her screams echoed through the basement and up into the main house, alerting the dinner guests that something terrible was happening below. Bruno's methodical attack continued, his teeth creating multiple deep lacerations across Linda's face and scalp, while his powerful hands struck her head and torso repeatedly. Bruno's hands tore at Linda's face and neck, his powerful fingers severing major blood vessels and causing massive hemorrhaging. When officers finally entered the home, they found Bruno still in the basement with Linda's body, his aggressive posture making any rescue attempt impossible. The chimpanzee was shot multiple times after refusing to retreat, his death adding to the tragedy that had destroyed what should have been a pleasant social evening. Linda was pronounced dead at the scene, having succumbed to severe trauma and blood loss from her extensive injuries. The incident shocked Connecticut's exotic animal community and revealed the ongoing violations of primate ownership regulations that had been implemented following the state's 2009 chimpanzee attack. The 6 dinner guests required extensive psychological counseling to cope with the trauma of witnessing Linda's brutal death, while Robert faced both criminal charges for violating exotic animal laws. It was August 23, 2015, and the afternoon heat pressed down on a small duplex in Tucson, Arizona, where the air inside felt heavy and enclosed. The spare bedroom had been converted into a reptile room, with heat lamps and glass enclosures raising the temperature even further, leaving little airflow and limited space to move once inside. Kira Valdez, 28, worked part-time at a local reptile store where she spent years handling snakes that most people avoided. Over time, that exposure built both her confidence and her interest in larger species, eventually leading her to keep a Burmese python of her own. The snake, Apollo, was about 14 feet long and weighed close to 110 pounds. What began as a personal passion also became part of her routine, filming care and feeding videos in hopes of growing a small online audience and turning that interest into something more stable. Burmese pythons rely on heat, motion, and scent when feeding. At close range, they fix on movement and temperature, tongue flicking to confirm what's in front of them. When the feeding response engages, they hold still, tracking until something enters striking distance. The strike is fast and directional, followed immediately by the body moving forward to anchor and wrap. The coils don't form all at once. They build in sections, tightening as the animal gains purchase and as the target resists. That afternoon, as she opened the enclosure and reached inside while preparing food, Apollo was already positioned near the front, focused and still. Her hands carried scent from the food, and when her arm moved within range, the combination of proximity, motion, and feeding context triggered the strike. Apollo lunged forward and clamped onto her forearm, the bite holding rather than releasing as his body pushed out of the enclosure behind it. Kira reacted by pulling her arm back and stepping away, but that movement gave the snake leverage. His body looped over her forearm first, then crossed her shoulder, using her own motion to pull himself higher. The initial wrap wasn't tight, it was placement. As she tried to shake him loose and step back, he added another loop, then another, each one settling into position as he gained more contact along her torso. The sequence built quickly. What began as a single bite and partial wrap turned into full-body contact within seconds. As she pushed against him and tried to unwind the coils, he shifted along her body, tightening where he had grip and sliding where he didn't. The loops overlapped unevenly, adjusting each time she moved, not locking in place but repositioning to maintain hold. As she backed into the shelving unit, the impact knocked equipment loose and broke her footing. When she went down, the snake followed, maintaining the bite and staying wrapped as his body settled across her chest and upper body. With the ground beneath her, she lost the ability to step or turn, and the coils began to set more firmly. From that point, each movement worked against her. When she tried to pull at the coils or turn her shoulders, the snake responded by tightening sections of his body where he had the best leverage. The pressure didn't come all at once. It increased in stages, each adjustment reducing her ability to move. Her breathing became more restricted as the coils shifted higher across her chest and arms. Attempts to reach and pull the snake loose were limited by the positioning of his body and the weight across her upper torso. The snake continued to adjust in small movements, maintaining contact and tightening where resistance remained. Over the next several minutes, her movements slowed. The room around her stayed largely unchanged aside from the fallen items near the shelving unit. The only sound was the shifting of the snake's body across the floor as it maintained its hold. In the next room, her daughter eventually noticed something was wrong when Kira did not respond and went to a neighbor who called emergency services. When responders arrived, they found the bedroom door partially closed and the snake still wrapped around Kira's body. It took multiple people working together to begin uncoiling sections of the snake and pulling it free before they could reach her. Kira was unresponsive when they pulled her free and was pronounced dead shortly after. The medical report confirmed death due to constriction, with findings consistent with restricted breathing and sustained compression of the chest. Apollo was taken by animal control, and the incident showed how quickly control can be lost when handling large constrictors alone during feeding. It was September 3rd, 2016, in Bakersfield, California. The late summer heat settled over the neighborhood in a steady, heavy quiet, the kind that made the air feel slow. Nothing unusual moved across the backyard fences. Yet small, familiar habits were already shifting just enough to set the stage for a preventable accident that no one fully recognized. Marcia Delton, 54, worked part-time as a bookkeeper and spent most afternoons tending to her small garden and the animals she kept as companions. She had adopted a sulcata tortoise named Buster 8 years earlier from an overwhelmed hobbyist who could no longer care for him. Marcia took pride in maintaining a routine, feeding, cleaning, and gentle interaction, believing her attentiveness had helped the tortoise settle into a stable, predictable life. Her backyard was her main sanctuary, and caring for Buster gave structure to her days, especially after shifting to part-time work the year before. Neighbors mostly saw Marcia moving quietly through her yard, carrying feed bowls or tending small patches of weeds. From her kitchen window, Aileen often caught glimpses of her daily routine and had recently noticed Buster trailing closer behind her than before. Marcia mentioned his appetite had grown with the heat, and he pressed against her legs at feeding time, a change she brushed off as seasonal. The yard itself showed signs of late summer: dry, uneven soil, pockets of turned dirt near the shed, and narrow walkways where shade barely reached. Spaces Marcia moved through without much caution. Sulcata tortoises, particularly adults nearing 70 pounds, are powerful herbivores with strong, stocky limbs and a natural tendency to push forward when navigating obstacles. While not aggressive predators, they can exhibit assertive food-seeking behavior, especially during periods of increased appetite. Their forward momentum can come quickly for their size, and once engaged in a pushing motion, they continue with steady, unyielding force, using their domed shells as leverage against surfaces or objects. Several warnings had been building in the days leading up to the incident. Buster's increased pacing before meals, the more frequent nudging against Marcia's legs, and the proximity with which he trailed her around the yard all indicated heightened food motivation. The uneven ground added instability, and the narrow corridor near the shed reduced her ability to move away quickly. Earlier that morning, Aileen had seen Buster circling near the shed for several minutes, an unusual behavior she interpreted as anticipation for feeding time. Marcia, carrying a metal bowl of chopped vegetables, seemed unaware of how tightly these small factors were converging. As she stepped into the shaded strip beside the shed and turned to lower the bowl, Buster surged forward with surprising speed for his size. His shell struck the back of her calf, knocking her off balance. The dry soil shifted beneath her feet, and she fell backward into the narrow space. Before she could rise, the tortoise advanced again, pressing his weight forward until her back met the wooden shed wall. Aileen, who had been rinsing dishes, looked out just in time to see Marcia's feet kicking against the dirt. Aileen rushed outside, calling out for Marcia as she crossed the yard. Buster maintained steady pressure, his front limbs braced and shell angled upward as he pushed. Marcia attempted to shift sideways, but the confined space between the shed and the garden bed left little room. Each time she tried to lift herself, Buster's weight pressed her down, his movements slow but firm. Aileen attempted to push him away at the shell's edge, but his mass barely shifted. Realizing she needed leverage, Aileen grabbed a shovel leaning near the garden bed. She wedged the handle between Buster's shell and the shed wall, applying steady pressure. After several seconds, the tortoise shifted just enough for Marcia to pull one leg free and slide sideways out of the narrow corridor. Buster continued to press forward for a moment before settling, his attention fixed on the dropped bowl. The yard fell quiet again once the immediate struggle ended. Marcia remained on the ground, breathing unsteadily, unable to put weight on her left side. The impact of the fall and the force of Buster's shell had left her in significant pain. Aileen called emergency services, and paramedics transported Marcia to the hospital, where scans revealed a fractured hip and internal bruising. She survived, but required prolonged rehabilitation. Animal control and a local rescue organization later assessed Buster, determining that his behavior stemmed from strong food motivation rather than aggression. He was rehomed to a regional tortoise sanctuary with more space and controlled feeding conditions. The incident received only a brief mention in a small gardening newsletter, as a reminder of the risks associated with large herbivores in confined backyard settings. In the months that followed, Marcia redesigned her yard with separate feeding zones and wider walkways, adjusting her routines to avoid narrow areas and unpredictable footing. The shed wall, previously marked by the tortoise's shell, served as a quiet reminder of how an ordinary afternoon feeding had shifted unexpectedly into a dangerous moment driven by instinct and circumstance. It was March 8, 2013, when late winter conditions still gripped the remote property in northern Idaho's wilderness. Prescott Halverson, a 45-year-old former hunting guide, walked toward the large outdoor enclosure where his 4-year-old male cougar waited for the evening feeding. The animal had been part of Halverson's life since 2009, when he had acquired the orphaned 6-week-old kitten. Halverson had worked as a professional hunting guide throughout Montana and Idaho for over 20 years, before a severe back injury ended his career in 2008. His horse had spooked during a guided elk hunt and thrown him, resulting in 3 fractured vertebrae and permanent nerve damage that left him unable to work. The cougar had been found as an orphan after its mother was killed by a vehicle on a remote forest road, and Halverson obtained the kitten through connections in the hunting community who knew of his forced retirement and isolation. Over 4 years, the animal had grown into a 140-pound predator living in a half-acre wooded enclosure on Halverson's property. The enclosure cost over $8,000 to construct, representing a significant portion of his disability settlement. Idaho law requires special permits for keeping large predators, permits Halverson had never obtained. His property sat 15 miles from the nearest maintained road, accessible only by four-wheel-drive vehicle in dry weather, and completely inaccessible during winter when snow made the final 5 miles impassable. This isolation had allowed him to keep the cougar undetected for its entire life. His wife had left him 9 months earlier, citing financial problems and her fear of the increasingly aggressive cougar. She told investigators Halverson had become obsessed with the animal, spending hours watching it and refusing to consider surrendering it despite her repeated requests. The enclosure incorporated natural forest terrain, Douglas fir and pine trees, granite boulders, and elevated platforms designed to simulate the cougar's natural habitat. Halverson fed the animal deer meat and occasionally live prey, including rabbits and chickens, maintaining what he believed was the cougar's connection to its wild instincts. His journal, recovered during the investigation, documented his belief that keeping the cougar's hunting abilities sharp was essential to its well-being, though wildlife experts later noted this practice only reinforced dangerous predatory behaviors. Cougars, also called mountain lions or pumas, are solitary ambush predators native to the Americas. Adult males typically weigh between 115 and 160 pounds and measure 6 to 8 feet in length, including the tail. They possess exceptional jumping ability, capable of leaping 18 feet vertically and 40 feet horizontally from a standstill. Cougars prefer to attack from elevated positions, dropping onto prey from above to deliver a killing bite to the back of the neck or base of the skull. Their bite targets the cervical vertebrae, capable of severing the spinal cord and causing immediate paralysis. Unlike social cats such as lions, cougars are solitary and maintain large territories that can exceed 100 square miles for adult males, making them particularly unsuited to captivity, even in large enclosures. Male cougars may become increasingly territorial and aggressive as they mature, especially during breeding season, which occurs in late winter and early spring. Multiple attacks on humans by both wild and captive cougars have been documented, with captive animals showing reduced fear of humans while retaining complete hunting instincts. According to the investigation's timeline, Halverson entered the enclosure at approximately 5:30 p.m., carrying approximately 20 pounds of deer meat in a plastic container. The enclosure's gate design required him to walk approximately 30 feet through the wooded terrain to reach the feeding platform where he typically deposited food. This walking route passed beneath several elevated platforms that the cougar used for resting and observation. The cougar had likely been resting on an elevated platform along Halverson's typical walking route. The animal's behavior was consistent with the heightened territorial aggression associated with breeding season, which peaks in late winter when male cougars become increasingly intolerant of intrusions into their territory. As Halverson walked beneath the platform, focused on navigating the uneven terrain while carrying the heavy container, the cougar appears to have launched its attack from above. The animal dropped onto Halverson's back and shoulders, its 140 pounds of muscle and momentum driving him face first into the ground. The impact knocked the food container from his hands and likely stunned him, giving him little or no opportunity to defend himself. The cougar's jaws closed around the back of Halverson's neck, targeting the cervical spine as the animal's hunting instincts dictated. The bite caused catastrophic trauma to his upper spinal column, consistent with the ambush technique cougars use on prey in the wild. Halverson's body went limp as the spinal damage would have caused paralysis, and the powerful bite inflicted deep puncture wounds into the tissue surrounding his neck and skull. The cougar eventually released and moved away. Halverson's body lay motionless near the feeding platform as the cougar retreated to a distant corner of the enclosure. The remote location and Halverson's isolated lifestyle meant the body was not discovered for 4 days. A friend who had been unable to reach him by phone drove to the property on March 12th, navigating the difficult road access to check on him. After receiving no response to repeated calls and knocking, and discovering Halverson's truck parked near the house, the friend investigated the property and spotted Halverson's body through the enclosure fencing. He contacted authorities from a safe distance, unwilling to approach while the cougar remained present. Law enforcement and wildlife officials arrived within 2 hours, accessing the remote property with four-wheel drive vehicles. The cougar was tranquilized using a dart rifle and subsequently euthanized due to the fatal attack and the impossibility of releasing a habituated animal into the wild. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and determined that the attack pattern was consistent with natural cougar hunting behavior, including the ambush from an elevated position and the bite targeting the cervical spine. The medical examiner determined that Halverson had died from catastrophic spinal injury, with the official cause of death listed as respiratory failure resulting from damage to the nerves controlling his diaphragm. Death would have followed rapidly after the initial attack. Halverson's death demonstrated that even years of familiarity cannot override the ambush instincts of apex predators, and that animals raised from infancy retain complete hunting capabilities when they reach maturity. It was May 3rd, 2015, when what should have been a joyful family celebration turned into an unthinkable nightmare in the suburban community of Homestead, Florida. The modest residential property sat nestled among palm trees and tropical vegetation, its backyard concealing a secret that would soon claim a life. Behind the house, a concrete pool enclosure housed an illegal resident that most neighbors never suspected existed. The warm Florida afternoon had drawn family members together for a small daytime gathering, but the festivities would end in tragedy. Vanna Cleet, a 36-year-old event coordinator, had built her career around creating memorable experiences for others. Her attention to detail and organizational skills made her sought after in the private event industry, where she orchestrated everything from intimate dinner parties to elaborate corporate functions. But Vanna harbored a dangerous fascination that extended far beyond her professional life. Hidden in her backyard was a 10-foot American alligator that she had raised from a tiny hatchling, keeping the massive reptile in complete violation of state and federal laws. The concrete enclosure that housed her alligator was a makeshift affair, lacking the sophisticated barriers and safety measures required for containing such a dangerous predator. Most critically, the structure had no locking overhead barrier, leaving the top completely open. For years, Vanna had maintained this illegal setup, hand-feeding the growing reptile and conditioning it to associate human presence with food. This practice had created a deadly familiarity between predator and caretaker. As family members gathered for the celebration, the alligator remained in its concrete pool, partially submerged and seemingly docile. The reptile had grown accustomed to the sounds and movements of people around its enclosure, but this familiarity masked the inherent danger that lurked beneath the surface. American alligators are among North America's most formidable predators, perfectly evolved for aquatic ambush hunting. These ancient reptiles can grow up to 14 feet in length and weigh over 1,000 pounds, with bite forces exceeding 2,980 pounds per square inch. Their powerful jaws contain 74 to 80 razor-sharp teeth designed to grip and tear flesh. Alligators are deceptively fast, capable of explosive bursts of speed both in water and on land. When conditioned through regular feeding, alligators lose their natural wariness and begin to associate humans with food sources. This behavioral modification transforms them from cautious predators into aggressive opportunists willing to attack anything they perceive as potential prey. Vanna made her fatal mistake when she noticed the alligator positioned near the edge of the enclosure and decided to reposition the animal using a long pole. Rather than maintaining safe distance from outside the pool, she stepped onto the submerged ledge just inside the pool's edge to get better leverage. The knee-deep water lapped around her legs as she extended the pole toward the reptile. The alligator remained motionless, its body partially submerged with only its eyes and nostrils visible above the waterline. As Vanna moved closer with the pole extended, the alligator's predatory instincts triggered. The massive reptile exploded from its stationary position with shocking speed, its powerful tail propelling it forward through the water. The alligator's jaws opened wide, revealing rows of conical teeth as it lunged directly at Vanna. The attack happened so quickly that she had no time to retreat. The alligator's jaws clamped down across Vanna's hip and thigh region, the most accessible target as she stood in the shallow water. The initial bite caused massive trauma, the teeth puncturing deep into muscle and bone. Following its instinctive hunting behavior, the reptile immediately initiated a death roll, using its powerful body to rotate rapidly in the water. The death roll served multiple deadly purposes. The violent spinning motion disoriented Vanna completely, making it impossible for her to maintain her bearings or attempt escape. The rotational force caused severe trauma and tearing injuries as the animal maintained its grip. Most critically, the death roll repeatedly forced Vanna underwater, preventing her from breathing. With each violent rotation, Vanna was driven beneath the surface, gasping desperately for air when her head briefly broke through between spins. Water rushed into her mouth and throat as she tried to breathe. She fought against the reptile's grip, her hands clawing at the water and the alligator's armored body, but the creature's power was overwhelming. For nearly 2 minutes, the sustained attack continued as Vanna's ability to resist gradually diminished. Oxygen deprivation and massive trauma took their toll with each passing second. Her movements became weaker, her struggles less coordinated. Finally, her body went limp in the reptile's jaws as she lost consciousness. Death occurred from the combination of massive internal bleeding, severe tissue damage, and drowning. State wildlife authorities launched an immediate investigation into the incident, focusing on the illegal possession of the alligator. The reptile was subsequently captured and euthanized by wildlife officials. It was July 4th, 2016, and the sprawling backyard of Randy Kowalski's modest ranch house in Zanesville, Ohio, buzzed with the excitement of the annual 4th of July family barbecue. Red, white, and blue decorations hung from the covered patio, while the smell of grilling burgers and hot dogs filled the warm summer air. 15 family members had gathered for the traditional celebration, including Randy's 2 teenage sons, his elderly parents, and several young cousins who ran around the yard with sparklers as the sun began to set over the rural property. At 43, Randy was a long-haul truck driver who had spent most of his adult life on the road, hauling freight across the Midwest to support his family after his divorce 3 years earlier. His love for exotic animals had started innocently enough with a few snakes and lizards, but had escalated dramatically when he purchased Saber, a 400-pound Bengal tiger, from a private breeder using money from a workers' compensation settlement. Randy had convinced himself that his bond with the massive cat made him special, often bragging to neighbors and coworkers about his unique pet that lived in the reinforced enclosure he had built behind his garage. Randy had been keeping the tiger illegally for 18 months, operating under constant threat of discovery by local authorities who had dramatically increased exotic animal enforcement following Ohio's 2011 Zanesville incident. Multiple neighbor complaints had already triggered 2 investigations, but Randy had managed to temporarily relocate Saber during inspections. Bengal tigers are among the world's most powerful predators, with adult males weighing up to 500 pounds and possessing the strength to kill prey much larger than themselves. These magnificent cats are solitary, territorial animals with razor-sharp claws that can grow up to 4 inches long and jaws capable of delivering a bite force exceeding 1,000 pounds per square inch. Despite being raised in captivity, tigers retain all their wild instincts and can become extremely aggressive when stressed, threatened, or exposed to loud noises and unfamiliar situations. Randy had been drinking beer steadily throughout the afternoon, his judgment increasingly impaired as he entertained his visiting brother-in-law with stories of his adventures with Saber. The distant sound of fireworks from neighboring properties had been making the tiger increasingly agitated, his pacing more intense, and his vocalizations more frequent as the evening progressed. Randy's family members had noticed Saber's restless behavior, but Randy dismissed their concerns with the overconfidence that alcohol and familiarity had bred over the years. As the barbecue wound down and darkness began to fall, Randy's brother-in-law expressed skepticism about Randy's claims of having a special relationship with the dangerous predator. The challenge to his credibility, combined with his intoxicated state, prompted Randy to announce that he would demonstrate his bond with Saber by entering the enclosure and interacting with the tiger directly. The attack came without warning as Randy stumbled deeper into the enclosure, his unsteady gait and strong scent of alcohol triggering Saber's predatory instincts. The massive tiger launched himself at Randy with explosive power, his 400-pound frame covering the distance between them in a single bound. Randy had no time to react as Saber's massive paws struck his chest, driving him backward onto the concrete floor with bone-crushing force. Saber's razor-sharp claws raked across Randy's torso, each swipe opening deep gashes that severed muscles and arteries while his powerful jaws clamped down on Randy's neck and throat. The tiger's 4-inch canine teeth punctured through vital structures in Randy's neck as his body convulsed under the tremendous pressure. Blood poured from the massive neck wounds as Saber maintained his crushing grip, the tiger's powerful jaw muscles compressing Randy's windpipe and severing major arteries with devastating efficiency. The horrified family members screamed and threw barbecue tools and lawn chairs at the enclosure, but their desperate attempts to distract Saber only seemed to intensify his aggressive behavior. Randy's teenage sons recorded the attack on their phones before the shock overwhelmed them, their footage later becoming crucial evidence in the investigation. Police officers arrived within 15 minutes of the first 911 call, but Saber remained aggressive and protective of his kill, forcing them to shoot the tiger multiple times before they could safely enter the enclosure. Randy was pronounced dead at the scene, his massive injuries making any medical intervention impossible. The traumatic incident left his entire extended family requiring psychological counseling, with several relatives developing lasting PTSD from witnessing the brutal attack. The investigation revealed that Randy had been keeping Saber illegally, violating multiple state and local ordinances regarding exotic animal ownership that had been significantly strengthened following the 2011 Zanesville exotic animal tragedy. The incident prompted Ohio legislators to further enhance exotic animal laws and increase penalties for illegal ownership of dangerous predators. It was November 14th, 2015, in Tampa, Florida. The house appeared calm from the outside, but inside, rising tension and repeated arguments were quietly pushing a sensitive household pet toward an unseen breaking point. Trevor Marsh, 27, worked long shifts in a hands-on maintenance job, often returning home drained and irritable. He had moved in with his sister Marcy, 25, only 6 months earlier to save money during his training period, fully intending it to be temporary. Their arrangement worked on the surface, shared rent, shared chores, but underlying frustrations simmered as bills fluctuated and schedules clashed. Marcy's green-winged macaw, Rico, was part of the house long before Trevor arrived. The bird occupied a large corner perch in the living room, a space Trevor had to cross repeatedly each day. He tried to keep his movements controlled, but his natural pace, quick, purposeful steps, sometimes startled the macaw, causing sharp vocalizations that only added to household strain. Marcy, who worked in a small dental office nearby, had raised Rico for nearly 15 years. The bird was deeply bonded to her, trusting her touch and responding to her voice. But he remained highly reactive to sudden changes in tone or movement. Marcy had registered Rico under the FWC personal pet permit years earlier, a requirement she renewed annually. Over the previous week, arguments had sparked between the siblings over utilities and scheduling. Each time a voice rose above normal conversation levels, Rico responded with wing flaring or loud squawks. Marcy noticed the behavior but interpreted it as typical macaw sensitivity. The landlord, who lived in the adjacent unit and often overheard household noise, had knocked twice in recent days to ask if everything was all right, but nothing seemed serious enough to warrant concern. The living room was small, with a couch along one wall, and Rico's perch by the window. Warm air carried faint bird dander and pine shavings despite the air conditioner. Outside, humidity pressed inward. Trevor moved through the tight space quickly while Rico shifted on his perch, feathers lifted in mild agitation. Green-winged macaws are large parrots with strong beaks capable of cracking nuts and exerting significant pressure when alarmed. Their instinctive responses rely heavily on environmental cues, changes in volume, body language, or sudden motion. When startled or overstimulated, they may launch from their perch and use a defensive bite to anchor themselves. While not inherently aggressive, their size and strength mean a fearful reaction can result in serious injury. Rico's long-term bond with Marcy made him predictable with her, but less so with fast movement or unfamiliar body cues from others. Warnings had accumulated quietly over the prior days. Rico had begun flaring his wings more frequently, especially when voices escalated. He retreated deeper into his perch when Trevor passed through the room too quickly, often raising his head feathers in a display of uncertainty. Earlier that afternoon, while the siblings exchanged tense words over a miscalculated bill, the bird shifted repeatedly, his tail feathers flicking against the metal bar. The landlord paused on his porch when he heard the argument rise, though he didn't intervene. As the discussion grew sharper, Trevor stepped through the living room toward the kitchen, his tone shifting abruptly. That change, sharp, loud, and unexpected, was the final trigger for Rico's startled response. As Trevor moved past the perch, Rico launched into the air with a rapid beat of wings. The motion was sudden and direct, a flight path angled upward before dipping toward Trevor's face. Marcy saw the arc clearly. Rico's wings flared wide, his body leaning forward as he latched onto the soft tissue just beneath Trevor's left eye. Trevor stumbled, grabbing the side of the cage to steady himself as the macaw clamped down in a defensive grip. The pressure of the beak, designed to break shells and hard surfaces, drove sharply into the skin around the eye, causing immediate bleeding. Trevor attempted to pull back, but Rico held firm, his talons hooking lightly into Trevor's shoulder for balance. Marcy rushed forward with a towel, hesitating for a moment as she tried to avoid injuring the bird. Her indecision allowed the struggle to continue several seconds longer. Trevor's breathing grew uneven as he bent slightly, trying to reduce the angle of Rico's bite. His free hand remained braced on the cage, muscles tense. In the adjoining unit, the landlord heard the impact of the struggle and hurried through the shared entryway, entering the living room as Marcy finally wrapped the towel around the bird's body. Together, Marcy and the landlord secured the towel around Rico's wings and torso, easing pressure away from Trevor's face. With coordinated effort, they managed to detach the macaw's beak from the torn tissue beneath the eye. Rico, still wrapped, was placed inside a spare travel cage to prevent further agitation. Trevor sat against the couch armrest, holding a clean cloth over his eye while Marcy called emergency services. Paramedics arrived quickly, noting deep eyelid lacerations and corneal damage before transporting Trevor to the hospital, where specialists confirmed partial vision loss. Rico later underwent a behavioral assessment but stayed with Marcy under stricter guidelines. The incident remained private, mentioned only in a brief homeowner's memo. Trevor moved out months later, leaving Marcy with a changed living room and a lasting reminder of the event. It was June 17, 2017, and the afternoon sun filled a crowded living room in Phoenix, Arizona. The space was tight and active, with people standing shoulder to shoulder, children moving between legs and furniture, and voices overlapping as attention shifted around a table set with a birthday cake. Decorations hung low, chairs were pushed aside, and movement came from every direction. Thalia Brennan, 34, had worked as a preschool teacher before losing her job the previous year. Not long after, she bought a chimpanzee named Jasper from an exotic animal seller while he was still young. She raised him inside the home alongside her son, treating him like a second child, dressing him in clothes, allowing him to move freely through the house, and letting him interact closely with visitors. As Jasper grew, his behavior changed. By around 5 years old, he was much stronger and harder to control, able to pull, grab, and overpower adults with sudden force. The changes came gradually, small incidents that were brushed off at the time. He would snatch objects without warning, latch onto arms during play, or react sharply to movement near his face. There had already been biting incidents, but they were explained away as agitation or overstimulation rather than a loss of control. At that stage, a chimpanzee is no longer manageable in a home environment. Their strength can exceed that of an adult human, especially in the upper body, and their responses to stress or crowding are fast and unpredictable. In close quarters, they don't strike once and stop. They grab, pull, and bite in. Rapid, shifting bursts, often targeting whatever is closest, while reacting to movement around them. That afternoon, the house was louder than usual. Voices overlapped, children moved quickly between chairs and tables, and the living room filled beyond its normal capacity. People stood shoulder to shoulder, stepping around each other as they talked, while children cut through gaps between adults. The noise didn't settle, it layered, building as more people spoke at once. Jasper moved through the room in short, restless passes, weaving between legs and furniture. His head turned quickly with each nearby movement, tracking hands, faces, and sudden shifts in position. When someone stepped too close, he flinched or pulled back sharply. A few guests noticed and gave him space, but most stayed focused on the gathering. As everyone crowded around the table for the cake, the space tightened even more. Arms reached across the table. People leaned in from all sides, and the center of the room, filled with overlapping movement. Chairs scraped against the floor, bodies pressed closer together, and there was no clear path through the room. Jasper ended up boxed in near the edge of the table. Movement came at him from every direction, hands reaching, bodies shifting, voices rising, and there was no way for him to move out of it. When a child brushed past him, the reaction was immediate. Jasper snapped toward the contact and grabbed Thalia's arm, yanking her forward hard enough to pull her off balance. She struck the edge of the table and went down, and he followed immediately, staying attached as he dropped with her. From that point, the movement turned fast and erratic. One hand stayed locked onto her arm, while the other grabbed at her shoulder and clothing, pulling her closer as he bit down. The bites came in quick, repeated bursts, each attempt to pull away triggering another grab or bite. She tried to curl inward and shield herself, but that only brought her closer. He latched onto whatever moved, arms, sleeves, shoulders, adjusting his grip as she struggled. There was no pause, just rapid pulling, grabbing, and biting in overlapping bursts. Around them, the room broke apart. People shouted, some grabbing children and rushing out, others freezing near the walls. One person stepped forward with a chair, then pulled back when Jasper turned toward the movement. Within seconds, the space emptied unevenly, leaving overturned chairs and scattered items behind. No one could get close enough to intervene. The attack continued in short, violent bursts, slowing only as her resistance weakened, but he remained over her, still reacting to movement. A neighbor called 911 after hearing the screaming. When officers arrived, they heard the disturbance and saw movement through the windows. They held position, waiting for an opening before entering. Inside, the situation remained unstable. When Jasper moved toward them, officers used lethal force. Paramedics entered immediately after, but Thalia was unresponsive and pronounced dead shortly after. The investigation later confirmed the chimpanzee had been kept without proper permits or containment, despite prior concerns about its behavior. The animal was euthanized following the incident. It was April 18, 2016, in a quiet suburban neighborhood of Indianapolis, Indiana. Spring had warmed the Midwest, and the tree-lined streets were peaceful as evening approached. Inside a modest two-story home on the east side of the city, Daxby Trone prepared for a routine task he had performed countless times. At 39, Daxby worked as a forklift mechanic, a job demanding precision and respect for machinery. But his true passion lay in the basement, where he had spent years cultivating a private collection of exotic reptiles. The basement had become a controlled habitat with heat lamps, humidity monitors, and reinforced enclosures lining the concrete walls. Temperature gauges regulated each environment, creating microclimates for different species. The space hummed softly with heating equipment and water features. Among his prized specimens was a 14-foot Burmese python he believed he kept within regulations. Daxby had raised the snake from a juvenile, watching it grow from 3 feet to its current length over nearly a decade. He fed it regularly, documented its growth, and kept careful records. Upstairs, his wife and teenage son went about their evening, accustomed to Daxby's solitary feeding sessions below. The routine was so normal they barely noticed when he went downstairs. Recently, Daxby had noticed the python entering its shed cycle and refusing 2 meals. Not unusual, but the timing concerned him. The snake's behavior seemed slightly off, more withdrawn than usual. Its eyes showed the milky appearance that precedes shedding. A latch on the enclosure had bent earlier that week, though it still seemed secure. Daxby planned to replace it, but hadn't yet. As darkness settled over Indianapolis, he descended the basement stairs with feeding tools in hand, unaware he was about to make a fatal mistake. Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species in the world, native to Southeast Asian jungles and swamps. These constrictors have rows of backward-curving teeth to grip prey and prevent escape. When they strike, their muscular bodies coil with astonishing speed, exerting enough pressure to restrict circulation and breathing once wrapped. Pythons do not crush bones as commonly believed. Instead, they disrupt blood flow and breathing, depriving the brain and organs of oxygen. A snake in shed can be more defensive and reactive, its clouded eyesight increasing reliance on heat-sensing pits and vibration detection. Their feeding response is extremely fast, triggered by warmth, movement, and scent. Daxby's fatal mistake came when he opened the enclosure and leaned inside to present prey at close range, abandoning the feeding tongs and second handler protocol recommended for constrictors this size. Alone and within strike range, he created the exact conditions safety rules are meant to prevent. The python struck with explosive speed, its mouth opening wide as needle-sharp teeth sank into his forearm. Its jaws clamped down with a vice-like grip, anchoring to his limb. Blood welled from punctures. Before Daxby could pull back, thick coils wrapped around his upper torso. He tried to wrench free, but each movement triggered the python's instinct to tighten. More coils encircled his chest and shoulders, forming overlapping loops that contracted with relentless pressure. Each time he exhaled, the coils cinched tighter, preventing a full breath. His ribcage compressed inward as the loops locked into place. As the snake shifted, one heavy coil pressed across his chest while another forced against the side of his neck, reducing blood flow through his carotid arteries and restricting lung expansion. His attempts to pry the coils loose were futile against the snake's immense muscle. Oxygen deprivation built rapidly. His vision blurred and coordination failed. With blood flow to the brain reduced, he weakened in seconds. Within roughly half a minute, his strength gave out and consciousness faded. He sagged against the frame and slid to the basement floor, the python still wrapped tightly around him. Upstairs, time passed quietly. Feeding sessions sometimes took longer, especially after missed meals, so his absence didn't alarm anyone. Nearly 15 to 20 minutes later, his wife went downstairs to check, expecting to find him finishing the routine. At first, she didn't grasp what she was seeing. In the dim basement light, it looked like he was kneeling beside the enclosure. Only as she stepped closer did reality become clear. Daxby lay motionless on the floor, the python still coiled around his torso. Emergency responders were called immediately. Animal control and fire personnel secured the snake and freed him, but he showed no responsiveness. Despite resuscitation attempts, he was later pronounced dead after the scene was made safe. Officials launched an investigation, with animal control and exotic pet specialists examining the scene. The python was removed and later transferred or euthanized according to policy. The coroner's report confirmed mechanical asphyxia from constriction during a feeding response. Local media coverage sparked renewed debate about the risks of keeping large constrictors as pets. Daxby's family released a brief statement expressing devastation and requesting privacy, emphasizing he had loved his animals and never imagined such an outcome. It was October 7th, 2015, and the remote mountain property outside Kalispell, Montana, offered breathtaking views of the Flathead Valley as real estate agent. Jennifer Martinez led her clients through the unique listing that had been on the market for over a year. The 46-year-old agent had built her reputation on selling challenging properties that other agents avoided, her persistence and creativity helping clients find value in unusual situations. This particular property came with an extraordinary complication that had both intrigued and deterred potential buyers. A large outdoor enclosure housing Dakota, a 120-pound mountain lion that the previous owner had been keeping illegally and would need to be relocated before any sale could be completed. Jennifer had been working in real estate for 15 years, specializing in rural and recreational properties that appealed to buyers seeking privacy and unique amenities. Her clients were a young professional couple from Seattle looking for a weekend retreat, accompanied by their attorney, who was reviewing the complex legal issues surrounding the property transfer. The seller had assured Jennifer that Dakota was completely docile and could be approached safely, describing the mountain lion as being as gentle as a house cat, despite his impressive size. The property featured a sprawling log home on 40 acres of pristine wilderness, with the mountain lion enclosure located behind the main house, in a clearing surrounded by towering pine trees. Dakota had been living on the property for 8 years, raised from a kitten after being orphaned in the wild, and hand-fed by humans throughout his development. However, Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks had recently discovered the illegal captive wildlife situation and issued orders for Dakota's immediate removal to a licensed sanctuary. Mountain lions, also known as cougars or pumas, are powerful predators capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves, with adult males weighing up to 200 pounds and possessing incredible strength and agility. These solitary cats are ambush hunters with razor-sharp claws and powerful jaws designed for delivering fatal bites to the neck and spine of their victims. Even when raised in captivity from birth, mountain lions retain all their natural hunting instincts and can become extremely dangerous when they perceive humans as potential prey or threats to their territory. Jennifer had researched the property extensively and spoken with the seller multiple times about Dakota's temperament and the legal complications surrounding his presence. The property tour had been proceeding normally, with Jennifer explaining the various features and legal requirements to her clients while they observed Dakota from outside his enclosure. However, during the inspection of the enclosure's structural integrity, Jennifer noticed that one of the gate latches appeared to be malfunctioning, potentially creating a safety hazard that could affect the property's insurability. As a licensed real estate professional, she felt obligated to document the condition properly for her clients and their attorney. Eager to provide thorough documentation for her clients and demonstrate her professional diligence, Jennifer made the fatal decision to enter the service corridor that ran between the outer fence and the mountain lion's main enclosure to examine the faulty latch mechanism more closely. She unlocked the service corridor gate and stepped inside the narrow walkway, calling Dakota's name in what she hoped was a soothing tone, while her 3 clients watched nervously from the safety of the outer fence line. As Jennifer examined the malfunctioning latch, the mechanism suddenly failed completely under her inspection, causing the enclosure gate to swing open and providing Dakota direct access to the service corridor where she stood trapped. The mountain lion immediately focused his attention on the intruder now within his reach, his amber eyes tracking Jennifer's movements, while his powerful muscles tensed with predatory alertness. Dakota's ears flattened against his head, and his tail began twitching, clear warning signs that Jennifer's inexperience with big cats prevented her from recognizing. The attack came with explosive speed as Dakota launched himself through the open gate at Jennifer, his 120-pound frame covering the distance in a single bound that gave her no time to react or retreat. The mountain lion's powerful paws struck Jennifer's chest and shoulders, driving her backward against the corridor fence while his razor-sharp claws raked across her torso and arms. Dakota's jaws clamped down on Jennifer's neck with devastating precision, his 4-inch canine teeth puncturing through vital structures and causing severe neck trauma. Jennifer's body convulsed under the mountain lion's weight as Dakota's natural hunting instincts took over completely. His predatory behavior focused on delivering the killing bite that would end his victim's struggles. The massive blood loss from severed arteries in her neck caused rapid loss of consciousness as Dakota maintained his grip. Sheriff's deputies arrived within 20 minutes of the emergency call, but Dakota's continued aggression made any rescue attempt impossible. The mountain lion was shot multiple times after refusing to retreat from Jennifer's body, his death adding to the tragedy that had begun as a routine property showing. Jennifer was pronounced dead at the scene, her massive neck injuries and blood loss making any medical intervention futile even if help had arrived immediately. The incident shocked Montana's real estate community and led to new protocols requiring specialized training for agents handling properties with illegal wildlife situations. Jennifer's death prompted legislative discussions about liability issues surrounding property transfers involving illegally kept dangerous animals. It was July 28, 2016, when the afternoon heat settled over the rural outskirts of Ocala, Florida. The temperature had climbed past 95 degrees, and humidity hung thick in the air. Daryl Kaminsky, a 34-year-old unemployed construction worker, had kept a 9-foot, 250-pound American alligator illegally in his backyard since acquiring it as a hatchling through an online exotic pet network in 2004. He had constructed a reinforced above-ground pool surrounded by chain-link fencing on the edge of the Ocala National Forest, where the isolation kept the animal largely undetected. His girlfriend had left him 8 months earlier, telling investigators he had grown obsessed with the alligator at the expense of their relationship. Neighbors had filed complaints with animal control, but Kaminsky avoided consequences by relocating the animal during inspections. He fed it whole chickens weekly, though the schedule had grown irregular as his finances deteriorated. His unemployment benefits were exhausted, he was facing eviction, and investigators noted he had been drinking heavily that afternoon. Phone records showed almost no outgoing calls in the previous 6 weeks. A notebook in his kitchen contained calculations of the animal's sale value alongside overdue rent notes, suggesting he had begun viewing the alligator as his last financial asset. Despite this, neighbors said he still referred to it by name, describing it as the one thing in his life that had never let him down. American alligators are powerful ambush predators, capable of explosive acceleration from a resting position. Adult males typically reach lengths of 10 to 15 feet and weights exceeding 500 pounds. Though 9-foot specimens commonly weigh between 200 and 300 pounds. They possess among the strongest bite forces of any living animal, capable of crushing bone and pinning large prey with ease. Alligators employ a hunting technique called the death roll, spinning rapidly while gripping prey to tear away flesh and disorient victims. In confined spaces, particularly water, they become especially dangerous. That afternoon, Kaminsky had apparently decided to clean the pool, where algae buildup had reduced water clarity to near zero, following a filtration failure weeks earlier. Investigators found a scrub brush near the edge, and the surrounding concrete was wet. At approximately 4:30 p.m., his heavily intoxicated state likely compromised his balance as he walked the narrow ledge, and he slipped into the 4-foot deep water beside the alligator. The impact and sudden movement appear to have triggered the alligator's predatory response. The animal struck almost immediately, its jaws clamping around Kaminsky's torso with devastating force. The bite was consistent with multiple rib fractures, and the alligator initiated the death roll. In the confined space of the above-ground pool, Kaminsky had no room to maneuver. The alligator's spinning motion drove him underwater repeatedly, filling his lungs with pool water while the crushing bite prevented effective breathing. The severity of rotational injuries documented during autopsy indicated the death roll had been sustained and violent. A neighbor returning home at approximately 7:15 p.m. noticed unusual stillness in Kaminsky's yard. The absence of the typical splashing sounds that usually indicated feeding time prompted him to investigate cautiously. He discovered Kaminsky floating face down in the pool, the alligator resting at the opposite end, showing no signs of continued aggression. Emergency services arrived within 20 minutes. The medical examiner estimated time of death sometime that afternoon based on body temperature and lividity patterns, concluding that Kaminsky had likely drowned before severe blood loss could occur, though the crushing trauma to his chest cavity would likely have proven fatal regardless. The combination of blunt force trauma, rib fractures, and water inhalation was consistent with a rapid death following the initial attack. Animal control officers used specialized equipment to secure and remove the alligator, which showed no resistance to capture. The investigation confirmed Kaminsky's illegal possession of the animal and determined alcohol intoxication as a contributing factor to his death. The alligator was transferred to a licensed facility, where it remains today. It was September 28, 2018, and the late afternoon wind moved across a dry property outside Reno, Nevada. Dust drifted through a simple fenced enclosure where tourists gathered for camel rides, standing close together on hard ground with little space. As the distance between people and the animal could close quickly, Darius Kowalski, 44, stood near the enclosure preparing a saddle while a large male Bactrian camel named Bruno moved restlessly inside the pen. After losing his job, he saw the animal as a way to attract visitors and generate income, buying Bruno a year earlier with no real experience managing large livestock. The enclosure was basic: wooden rails, a single gate, and no secondary barrier. Sufficient under normal conditions, but not built for escalation. Bruno was in a phase where male camels become highly aggressive. During this period, they pace, vocalize, and react sharply to movement, often treating nearby people as rivals. Their behavior is force-driven, biting, lunging, and using their weight to overpower, triggering in sudden bursts at close range. In the weeks leading up to that day, those changes had already become clear. Bruno paced more often and reacted immediately when people approached. His throat sac would inflate, and he made low, gurgling sounds while tracking movement around the enclosure. Local ranchers had warned Darius that male camels become difficult to handle during this period and should not be used around people, but he continued operating. That afternoon, the group included several families with children gathered along the fence, watching as Darius entered the enclosure carrying a saddle. Bruno was already moving in short, restless paths, his pacing tight and repetitive as he turned his head to track Darius's movement across the pen. As Darius closed the distance, the camel shifted direction and faced him directly, the pacing stopping just long enough for that focus to settle. The reaction came without warning. Bruno lunged forward with a sudden burst, striking Darius high with his chest and neck, knocking him backward onto the ground. Before Darius could recover, the camel followed immediately, lowering his head and biting down onto his shoulder and upper arm, jerking him sideways across the dirt. The movement was uneven and violent. Bruno released and bit again, this time higher, using his head and neck to shove and drag as Darius tried to pull free. When Darius rolled and tried to get up, the camel stepped in, driving him back down with its front legs. The force wasn't a single motion. It came in repeated surges: bite, shove, step, as the animal reacted to every attempt to move. Darius tried to push himself up, grabbing at the camel's legs, but the footing gave him no leverage. Bruno reared slightly and came down again, forcing his weight into Darius's torso before shifting position and biting once more. Each time Darius moved, the camel responded with another burst, biting, pushing, or stepping in to keep him down. Outside the fence, people began shouting and pulling back, some grabbing children and moving away from the rails. One person moved toward the gate, then stopped when Bruno turned sharply toward the movement. No one entered the enclosure. Inside, the attack continued in short, aggressive bursts. Bruno stayed close, alternating between biting and forcing his weight down, reacting to movement rather than stopping. As Darius's attempts to move slowed, the intensity of the bursts eased, but the camel remained near him, stepping in whenever he shifted. Within a short time, he stopped moving. The camel stayed nearby as a tourist called emergency services and others backed away. When responders arrived, they held position until the animal could be secured using barriers and control equipment before entering the enclosure. Darius was found on the ground with severe injuries and no signs of life and was pronounced dead at the scene, with findings later confirming fatal crush and trauma injuries. Authorities determined that the camel had been used for rides during a period when it was unsafe to handle, and that the enclosure and lack of proper safety measures contributed to the incident. The animal was removed from the property and transferred to a facility equipped to manage large livestock. It was October 19, 2017, when a bond forged over decades would shatter in moments of uncontrolled violence on a rural property in Travis County, Texas. The sprawling acreage sat isolated among rolling hills and dense oak groves, far from the scrutiny of neighbors or authorities. The property had served as both home and sanctuary for an unusual family arrangement that defied nature's boundaries. On this crisp autumn morning, the peaceful silence would be broken by sounds that would haunt investigators for years to come. Roderick Pants, a 55-year-old former animal transport worker, had spent his career moving exotic creatures across state lines for zoos, circuses, and private collectors. His experience with dangerous animals had given him confidence that would prove tragically misplaced. Years earlier, he had acquired an infant chimpanzee through illegal channels, raising the animal inside his home like a human child. What began as an act of compassion had evolved into a dangerous delusion about the nature of wild animals. The chimpanzee had grown from a playful infant into a mature male weighing over 130 pounds. For years, the animal had lived without proper containment, roaming freely through the house and property. Pants had never installed safety barriers, containment rooms, or emergency protocols. His feeding routines had become increasingly inconsistent, creating unpredictable stress for an animal whose natural behaviors were being constantly suppressed. The chimpanzee's strength had grown exponentially with age, but Pants continued to treat the powerful primate as if it were still the helpless infant. On that October morning, Pants was engaged in his usual routine of cleaning and food preparation desperation when the animal's behavior began to shift. The chimpanzee had been waiting for its morning meal, but delays in the feeding schedule had created mounting tension. The animal's body language showed signs of agitation that Pants either failed to recognize or chose to ignore. Chimpanzees are among the most powerful primates on Earth, possessing strength that exceeds human capability through superior leverage and muscle density. An adult male's pulling strength can be nearly twice that of a human of similar weight, with muscle structure evolved for life in the forest canopy. Their arms are particularly powerful, capable of generating tremendous force when swinging through trees or defending territory. Chimpanzees possess large canine teeth designed for both feeding and combat, and their hands provide devastating gripping strength. In the wild, chimpanzees live in complex social hierarchies, maintained through displays of dominance and submission. When these natural behaviors are suppressed through captivity, the resulting psychological stress can trigger explosive violence. Male chimpanzees are particularly territorial and aggressive, especially when their routine is disrupted. Their attacks are chaotic and prolonged, repeatedly targeting vulnerable areas like faces, hands, and genitals without restraint. Pants made his fatal mistake when the chimpanzee became aggressive during the feeding delay, and he attempted to physically restrain the animal. Rather than retreating to safety, he tried to grab the chimpanzee by the arms as he had done countless times before. But this time, the animal's tolerance had reached its breaking point. The chimpanzee's response was immediate and devastating. The powerful primate overpowered Pants instantly, its superior strength making resistance futile. The chimpanzee seized Pants's arms and dragged him violently to the floor, then pinned him with crushing force. The impact caused immediate trauma to Pants's head and upper body, but the attack was far from over. Using its powerful grip, the chimpanzee held Pants down while continuing its assault with relentless aggression. The animal maintained its grip on Pants, applying crushing pressure to his arms and shoulders while preventing escape. The chimpanzee then began targeting Pants's extremities and face with its formidable canine teeth. Multiple deep bite wounds to his hands and forearms severed tendons and caused severe tissue damage. The primate's instincts drove it to attack the most vulnerable areas, focusing on Pants's face and hands with terrifying precision. The chimpanzee's teeth tore into facial tissue and scalp, creating multiple traumatic injuries. Bite wounds ravaged his features, destroying soft tissue and creating catastrophic damage. The animal continued targeting his hands and arms, its powerful jaws crushing bone and tearing through muscle. The attack persisted for several agonizing minutes, the primate maintaining its dominant position. Fatal injuries accumulated as the prolonged assault continued without mercy. Pants's attempts to protect himself grew weaker as shock set in and blood loss mounted. The combination of severe hemorrhaging from facial wounds, extensive trauma to his hands and arms, and crushing injuries created a cascade of life-threatening conditions. The attack finally ceased when the victim's body went limp, with death occurring before emergency services could reach the remote location. Local authorities arrived to find a scene of unprecedented violence that shocked even experienced investigators. The chimpanzee was subsequently tranquilized and euthanized by wildlife officials. An investigation revealed the illegal nature of Pants's animal ownership and the complete absence of safety measures. The incident sparked renewed debate about private ownership of dangerous primates. It was May 12, 2018 in Portland, Oregon. A cool, quiet morning settled over the second-floor apartment, but inside one unit, days of growing tension were aligning toward a sudden, unnoticed breaking point. Lena Ortiz, 32, worked as a freelance graphic designer from home. Her schedule shifted constantly, and the irregular hours often kept her awake long past midnight, leaving her mornings slow and quiet. She lived with her Bengal cat, Milo, who she had adopted 3 years earlier when a previous owner surrendered him due to his energy level. Lena enjoyed the structure of caring for him, and despite the challenges of owning a high-drive hybrid breed, she believed she understood his moods well enough to manage him safely. Her work required long stretches at her desk, and she often reassured herself that Milo's pacing and occasional agitation were just part of his temperament, not signs of a deeper issue. The apartment overlooked an alley with a small feral cat colony, which kept Milo on edge. He paced, vocalized, and pawed at the blinds. Construction noise during the week heightened his agitation. Scratch marks appeared on the window frame, and Jess occasionally heard him growling at movement outside. That morning, sunlight caught on dust drifting through the air, and the apartment carried the smells of coffee and the faint musk of cat fur. The alley below echoed with a brief skirmish between two feral tomcats, their yowls carrying up to the second floor. Inside, Milo's body stiffened, and his tail snapped sharply from side to side as he pressed against the window blinds, trying to see the source of the noise. The room felt close, the air heavy with a tension that neither woman recognized as dangerous. Lena approached with the intention of guiding him away and settling him before starting her workday, unaware of how close he was to a full arousal spike. Bengal cats, particularly those with higher percentages of wild lineage, retain strong predatory and territorial responses. They are sensitive to sound, movement, and visual stimuli, and can exhibit redirected aggression when they are unable to reach the source of their agitation. In high arousal states, their reactions can be fast and severe, driven less by intent and more by instinctual overstimulation. Their musculature is dense for their size, and their hind legs allow powerful kicking motions, capable of causing deep scratches or punctures. In the minutes leading to the attack, several warnings were visible. Milo's ears remained pinned forward, his tail jerked rapidly, and he emitted a low, continuous yowl directed at the movement outside. Jess, from the kitchen, heard it and assumed it would pass, having witnessed similar behavior before. The earlier fight between the tomcats had left Milo's body rigid with tension. The construction noise in the alley had already agitated him repeatedly throughout the week, and the scratches on the window frame showed clear signs of escalating frustration. Lena, used to his vocalizations, reached toward his shoulders without pausing to assess his posture, likely assuming a gentle touch would diffuse the moment. The shift from stillness to violence was immediate. As Lena's hand came down on Milo's back, he whipped around and latched onto her forearm with his front claws. His rear legs struck in rapid succession, raking down her skin in parallel lines. Jess, hearing the sudden thud of movement against the wall, looked up to see Milo clinging to Lena's arm as she tried to pull away. The cat's grip tightened, each kick deepening the cuts. When Lena attempted to stand, Milo climbed upward, using her shirt for traction, and targeted her cheek and scalp with fast, repeated bites. Jess crossed the room with a blanket, trying to create a barrier, but Milo struck out as she reached forward, leaving a jagged mark across her wrist. The attack continued for several seconds more, before Jess managed to wrap the blanket around Milo's torso, creating just enough separation for Lena to pull back. Milo thrashed briefly inside the fabric, before Jess carried him to the bathroom and shut the door, isolating him from further contact. Blood droplets trailed from the living room to the hallway, marking the short but severe struggle. The apartment fell silent, broken only by Lena's unsteady breathing. The attack had lasted less than a minute, but the injuries were substantial. Puncture wounds ran across her cheek and near her eyelid, and deep scratches lined her forearm. Jess called emergency services, and paramedics arrived to treat the wounds before transporting Lena for further evaluation. Milo remained confined, the bathroom door reinforced with a towel beneath the gap to prevent escape. Lena survived the incident, but required microsuturing around the eyelid and follow-up care to monitor for infection. Animal Control conducted a mandatory 10-day observation period for Milo, ultimately determining that the attack stemmed from redirected aggression rather than inherent viciousness. They did not seize him permanently, but noted the incident in their internal records. The case received almost no public attention, appearing only as a small item in a neighborhood bulletin describing an indoor pet aggression call. Jess moved out 2 months later, saying the incident changed how she viewed high-drive cats in small spaces. By autumn, the apartment was repainted and re-leased, the scratched window frame the only trace of how quickly a routine morning had turned violent. It was October 9th, 2016, and dusk settled over an isolated ranch house outside Bakersfield, California. The last light pushed through dusty windows across a quiet, cluttered space. The property sat alone at the end of a dirt road, with no nearby help, as a large animal paced restlessly inside. Inside, 52-year-old Ezra Holloway sat in his living room with a bottle of whiskey on the table, while a cougar moved between the rooms of the house. He had raised the animal, called Shadow, from a cub, but what had once been small and manageable had grown into a full-grown predator that no longer fit the space or the way he was living. The outdoor pen he had built had been damaged more than once, and over time he began letting the cougar inside more often, relying on routine instead of control. At that size, a cougar does not behave like a pet. It is built for short-distance ambush, quiet movement, sudden acceleration, and a direct attack aimed at the neck. Unlike animals that struggle in extended bursts, cougars rely on speed and placement. They close distance quickly, latch on, and use their jaws to secure the throat while stabilizing with their forelimbs. In the months leading up to that evening, Shadow's behavior had changed. The animal paced more, especially in tight, repetitive paths. It reacted faster to movement and resisted being redirected. Ezra noticed it but didn't treat it as a serious problem. That evening, he had been drinking. for several hours. His coordination was off, and his reactions were slower than usual. The cougar had been confined outside for part of the day and was already agitated when he brought it back inside. Once inside, Shadow moved quietly between rooms, no longer circling in wide paths but cutting closer to walls and corners. Its movement was lower and more deliberate, with brief pauses where it held still before shifting again. Ezra tried to guide it the way he had before, stepping into its path and reaching out to redirect it toward the living room, but the animal slipped past him, avoiding contact rather than responding to it. As Ezra turned and reached again, his attention broke for a moment. That's when the movement came from behind. Shadow lunged in a single, silent burst, covering the short distance before Ezra could react. The impact hit high across his back and shoulders, driving him forward and off balance. Before he could turn, the cougar's forelimbs locked in, claws, catching for grip as its weight pulled him down. The bite followed immediately. It targeted the side of his neck, jaws closing fast and deep as the cougar shifted its position to stay above and slightly behind him. Instead of repeated striking, it held there, adjusting its stance as he tried to move, tightening its grip whenever he struggled to turn or push up. Ezra tried to reach back and force it off, but his movements were uncoordinated. Each attempt to twist or pull away exposed more of his upper body, allowing the cougar to reposition without letting go. The attack was not chaotic. It was controlled and direct, focused on maintaining the bite and keeping him down. Within a short time, his movements slowed. The room remained largely undisturbed aside from the initial fall. No prolonged struggle across the space, just a brief, violent collapse near the couch. In another room, the dogs began barking, the sound continuing for some time before fading, with no one nearby to recognize it as an emergency. 2 days later, a delivery driver noticed packages left outside and heard barking from inside the house, prompting a call to the sheriff's office for a welfare check. Deputies arrived and looked through the windows, where they could see movement inside, and entered cautiously before encountering the cougar still in the house. When the animal shifted toward them, they used lethal force. Inside, they found Ezra on the living room floor, with severe injuries to the neck and upper body and no signs of life. The investigation later confirmed the cougar had been kept without proper permits or secure containment, despite earlier reports of a large cat in the area. It was May 22, 2013, and the backyard of Tom Bradley's rustic log home in Missoula, Montana, was decorated with balloons and streamers for his grandson's high school graduation party. 12 family members had gathered to celebrate the milestone, including Tom's elderly parents, his adult children, and several young grandchildren who played on the wooden swing set he had built years earlier. Hidden deep in the forested section of his 40-acre property was the large enclosure where Buster, a 300-pound black bear, had lived for the past 3 years after Tom illegally rescued him as an orphaned cub from the wilderness surrounding their mountain home. At 55, Tom was a recently retired logger who had spent his career working in Montana's vast forests, his deep connection to wildlife leading him to take in the orphaned bear cub, despite knowing he lacked the required wildlife rehabilitation permits and proper documentation for legal possession. Tom's wife had initially opposed keeping Buster, but her husband's gentle nature with animals and his success in raising the cub had gradually won her over. The bear had become a beloved family member, with Tom's grandchildren growing up watching their grandfather interact safely with one of nature's most powerful predators. Though the family understood the need for absolute secrecy about Buster's existence, Tom had built an elaborate habitat for Buster in a remote section of his property, carefully concealed from neighboring homes and main roads to avoid detection by Montana fish, wildlife, and parks officials. Black bears are North America's most common bear species, with adult males weighing between 300 and 400 pounds and possessing incredible strength capable of breaking down doors and overturning cars. Despite their name, black bears can be brown, cinnamon, or even blonde in color, and they are omnivores with powerful jaws and razor-sharp claws designed for digging and climbing. Black bears can become extremely dangerous when defending food sources or feeling threatened, their speed and agility making escape nearly impossible once an attack begins. The graduation party had been proceeding smoothly, with family members enjoying Tom's famous barbecue while sharing stories and celebrating his grandson's academic achievements. However, Tom had been following his usual routine of feeding Buster during the early evening hours, a schedule he had maintained religiously for 3 years. Despite the ongoing celebration, Tom felt compelled to maintain Buster's feeding routine believing that any disruption might stress the bear or draw unwanted attention if Buster became agitated. As Tom made his way to Buster's hidden enclosure, carrying the bear's evening meal of fish and berries, he noticed that Buster seemed more agitated than usual, pacing restlessly near the fence line and vocalizing more frequently. The sounds of the graduation party, combined with the presence of so many unfamiliar people on the property, had clearly stressed the bear beyond his normal tolerance levels. Tom entered Buster's enclosure carrying the plate of food, his familiar presence initially seeming to calm the agitated bear who had been pacing near the fence line. However, Buster's behavior had been changing over the past several months as he reached full maturity, his natural instincts becoming stronger and his tolerance for human presence decreasing. The combination of territorial stress from the nearby celebration and his evolving wild nature had pushed Buster beyond his comfort zone. As Tom approached with the food, Buster's demeanor suddenly shifted from cautious interest to aggressive dominance, his natural instincts overriding 3 years of human conditioning. The 300-pound bear charged Tom with explosive speed, his powerful frame covering the distance between them in seconds, while his massive paws struck Tom's chest with bone-crushing force. Tom dropped the plate of food as Buster's claws raked across his torso, opening deep gashes that severed muscles and arteries while his powerful jaws delivered devastating bites to Tom's head and shoulders. Buster's powerful jaws delivered deep bites to Tom's neck and head, while his claws continued to rake across his victim's body, tearing flesh and opening massive wounds that caused catastrophic bleeding. The bear's powerful swiping motions with his claws created devastating lacerations across Tom's torso and limbs. Tom's movements ceased within the first few minutes of the attack, as massive blood loss overwhelmed his system. Emergency responders arrived within 15 minutes of the first 911 call, but Buster's continued aggression made any rescue attempt impossible. The bear was shot multiple times after refusing to retreat from Tom's body, his death devastating Tom's wife, who had considered Buster part of their family for 3 years. Tom was pronounced dead at the scene, his massive injuries from deep bites, tearing, and catastrophic bleeding making any medical intervention impossible, even if help had arrived immediately. The incident shocked Montana's wildlife community and prompted discussions about the ethics and safety of illegally keeping wild animals, regardless of how young they were when acquired. Tom's death led to stricter enforcement of wildlife regulations and served as a tragic reminder that wild animals can never be fully domesticated, no matter how much love and care they receive from human caretakers. It was August 5, 2016, when the scorching Texas heat bore down on a remote rural property outside Houston. The sprawling acreage, dotted with makeshift enclosures and rusted metal structures, belonged to Vince Fain, a 52-year-old scrap dealer who had turned his isolated land into something far more dangerous than a typical junkyard. Cicadas droned in the distance, and the smell of hot metal and dust hung in the air. Heat shimmered above the scrap piles, and the property lay still under the weight of the afternoon sun, broken only by the creak of loose metal swaying in the breeze, and the faint buzz of insects drifting across the dry fields. Among the twisted metal and abandoned machinery lived several exotic animals, including a magnificent yet deadly Bengal tiger that Fain had acquired years earlier through private exotic animal networks. Texas's lenient laws regarding big cat ownership had made this arrangement possible, though investigators would later question whether proper safety protocols were followed and whether registration requirements had been maintained. Records later showed gaps in inspection history and enclosure documentation, along with signs that some structural repairs had been done informally using salvaged yard materials. Older weld seams appeared uneven, suggesting quick fixes rather than professional reinforcement. The property's isolation meant any emergency response would take precious time to arrive, a factor that would prove catastrophic on this sweltering afternoon. The nearest neighbors were separated by wide stretches of land, and passing traffic on the distant road was rare enough that loud noises often carried across the open fields. Fain had been feeding his animals for years, developing what he believed was a routine understanding with the predators under his care. The Bengal tiger, a male weighing roughly 450 pounds of muscle and instinct, had shown increased food anticipation in recent months, pacing restlessly in its steel bar enclosure as feeding time approached. Its tail flicked sharply, and low chuffing sounds occasionally escaped its throat whenever Fain appeared. The worn dirt along the inside fence showed how often it followed this same restless path. Tigers are apex predators capable of delivering bite forces approaching 1,000 pounds per square inch, with razor-sharp claws reaching around 3 inches long. Their hunting instincts remain acute even in captivity, and any breach in safety protocol can trigger a predatory response instantly. Even experienced handlers rely on strict separation systems, since familiarity does not reduce unpredictability. As the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the property, Fane approached the enclosure, carrying chunks of raw meat for the daily feeding. The enclosure featured a sliding feeding gate system, designed to keep handlers safe during meals. But on this day, a fatal lapse in judgment would prove deadly. The tiger's pacing tightened into shorter, focused movements as Fane stepped closer, its gaze locked on the food. Fane opened the outer feeding access while failing to ensure the inner safety gate was fully secured. He placed his arm and upper body within striking distance of the predator, close to a section of bars where spacing had widened over time from wear, weather exposure, and poor maintenance. The compromised section sat slightly bowed outward, subtle enough to escape notice but wide enough to present serious danger. The moment he pushed the meat through the slot, the tiger reacted instantly. With explosive speed, the big cat lunged forward, its massive jaws clamping down on Fane's forearm with crushing force. The tiger's powerful neck muscles engaged as it pulled with its body weight, dragging Fane's arm through the wide gap and slamming his torso against the enclosure. Unable to release its grip, the tiger began the violent head-shaking motion big cats use to subdue prey, causing catastrophic damage to his arm and shoulder. The bars rattled sharply with each impact, echoing across the silent property. The bite tore through muscle and severed major arteries, triggering rapid, severe blood loss. Forced tightly against the enclosure and unable to pull free his trapped limb, Fane remained within reach as the predator continued to maul. The attack unfolded in brutal seconds, leaving almost no chance for escape or assistance. The tiger maintained its crushing bite while raking its claws across his shoulder and upper chest, opening deep lacerations that bled heavily. The sustained mauling continued for several minutes as blood loss worsened and shock set in, before Fane ultimately lost consciousness from exsanguination and traumatic injuries. A neighbor who heard the commotion called emergency services, reporting frantic shouting and metal rattling across the quiet property. Responders arrived to find Fane unresponsive beside the enclosure. Paramedics assessed the scene, but confirmed there were no signs of life. The death was ruled exsanguination and traumatic injuries from a captive tiger attack. Local authorities launched an investigation into the operation, raising questions about enclosure maintenance, safety systems, and compliance with regulations. Animal control officers and wildlife specialists later assessed the remaining animals and enclosure conditions, documenting several safety deficiencies requiring immediate correction. The incident sent shockwaves through the exotic animal community and renewed debates about private big cat ownership in Texas. It was August 4, 2017, in Columbus, Ohio. A humid stillness hung over the duplex, nothing outwardly unusual. Yet inside an upstairs bedroom, a series of overlooked choices was quietly aligning toward tragedy. Evan Marlowe had lived in the duplex for almost 3 years. At 29, he worked long shifts as a warehouse picker and kept a small collection of reptiles as a solitary hobby. The routine helped him unwind after unpredictable hours on the job. He wasn't careless, but his limited income often pushed him toward improvised enclosures and discounted feeder rats, which meant his Burmese python's feeding schedule never stayed consistent. Those who knew him described him as patient and methodical, someone who tried to do things correctly even when his resources fell short. The python, a 10-foot subadult female, was the center of his small collection. He had built her enclosure from plywood and plexiglass, proud of the craftsmanship, despite its occasional heating malfunctions. His neighbor Travis helped him check temperatures and missed the enclosure when Evan worked overtime. Travis later said that Evan had been mentioning the snake's growing restlessness. Her movements tracked hands through the glass more sharply, and she pressed against the enclosure door more frequently. None of this seemed alarming to them at the time, only signs that the snake was maturing and feeding more aggressively. The reptile room sat above the duplex's living area, warm and poorly ventilated. Faint scents of bedding, disinfectant, and thawed feeders lingered. Evan had cleaned the enclosure earlier, leaving chemical residue on his hands. The python hadn't eaten in 9 days, and Travis assumed the rustling sounds were routine. Burmese pythons are ambush predators that rely heavily on scent, heat, and movement. Even subadults around 10 feet can apply significant pressure, tightening in response to resistance rather than direct aggression. Their feeding response sharpens when food is irregular or when environmental cues, such as body heat or strong odors, mimic prey. In enclosed, warm spaces, misidentification can happen quickly, and without the dramatic displays often shown in media. In the hours leading up to the attack, several subtle warnings were present. The heating pad beneath the enclosure had been inconsistent for weeks, sometimes overheating. The snake had been pacing the enclosure more than usual the night before. And most notably, Evan had cleaned the enclosure without washing the disinfectant fully off his arms before handling her. Travis would later mention that the room smelled strongly of cleaning agents when he entered it that afternoon. Each of these factors contributed to a heightened feeding response state in the python, though none seemed alarming enough for Evan to pause. He had handled her dozens of times without trouble, and experience often breeds misplaced confidence. As Evan lifted the snake from the temporary holding bin to return her to the enclosure, the first coil tightened around his forearm. Evidence suggests she registered the warmth and scent on his skin as prey contact. The sequence happened quietly. A muffled thud traveled through the wall, followed by the scrape of feet against the wooden floor. That was when Travis entered the room. He found Evan partially collapsed against the bed frame, the python already wrapped twice around his torso with a third coil tightening along his upper arm. Travis later described the movements as methodical rather than chaotic. Each time Evan tried to shift or pull away, the snake's grip cinched tighter in short, deliberate increments consistent with constrictor feeding behavior. Her jaw was braced near his elbow, not attempting to bite, but anchoring for leverage. The room was warm, and both men were sweating as Travis tried to wedge a broom handle between the coils. The attempt only triggered additional tightening. The snake responded to pressure with more pressure. Evan's struggle weakened within minutes, his back pinned against the edge of the mattress. The python maintained her position, still coiled, breathing slowly and evenly. Travis called emergency services, leaving the phone on speaker as he continued trying to create space between the coils and Evan's chest. Responders arrived with animal handling tools, cooling spray, and alcohol swabs to disrupt the snake's grip. They worked deliberately, peeling each coil off with coordinated pressure until they freed Evan's torso and removed the final loop from his arm. Evan did not regain consciousness. Paramedics pronounced him dead at the scene from compressive asphyxia. His phone was found on the floor beside the bed, screen cracked from the initial fall. The temporary holding bin remained open, suggesting he intended only a brief transfer. The python, once fully uncoiled, appeared lethargic from exertion. She was transported to a small rehabilitation facility, where staff noted early signs of metabolic bone disease, likely tied to inconsistent feeder nutrition and the prolonged temperature issues that had affected her digestion. State agriculture officers later confirmed that Evan did not hold the restricted snake permit required in Ohio for Burmese pythons, and the case was logged as an unregistered ownership violation. The incident stayed local, mentioned only once in a small community paper focused on reptile care safety. Travis later surrendered his own animals, recognizing how subtle husbandry issues can escalate. The bedroom was cleared within days, leaving only faint disinfectant and plywood odors behind. It was June 19, 2015, when the hot afternoon sun beat down on the rural property outside San Diego County's eastern edge. Inside the rented single-story house, Meridian Ashcroft, a 38-year-old former animal trainer, prepared lunch in the kitchen while her 8-year-old male chimpanzee moved through the living room. The chimpanzee had lived with Ashcroft since infancy, but recent months had brought increasingly concerning behavioral changes. Ashcroft had worked in the entertainment animal industry for 15 years, training various species for film and television across Southern California. Her specialty was primates, having handled dozens of chimpanzees during her career. She acquired the chimpanzee in 2007 as a 6-month-old infant, after the production company that owned him discontinued its primate program amid growing criticism. Rather than surrendering the animal to a sanctuary as policy required, Ashcroft kept him illegally, raising him in her home as she would a human child. California law prohibits private ownership of great apes, though enforcement varies across rural areas. Ashcroft's isolated living situation, neighbors scattered across acres of undeveloped land, had allowed her to keep the chimpanzee undetected for 8 years. She had no children and lived alone, having devoted her life to animal training work that had dried up as the industry moved away from great apes. The chimpanzee had been dressed in human clothing as an infant and treated as a surrogate child. Ashcroft fed him at the dinner table, allowed him to sleep in a modified crib, and attempted to toilet train him. As the animal matured, such treatment became increasingly impossible, though she continued allowing him largely free access to the house. Neighbors reported increasingly loud vocalizations from the property over the previous 6 months, including aggressive hooting characteristic of agitated chimpanzees. One neighbor had witnessed the chimpanzee lunging at Ashcroft through a window approximately 3 weeks before the incident, describing a scene where she retreated from the room. No formal complaints had been filed, as neighbors were unsure of the legality of her situation and reluctant to create conflict. Chimpanzees are humanity's closest genetic relatives, sharing approximately 98% of human DNA, but they are also among the most dangerous animals to keep in captivity. Adult male chimpanzees typically weigh between 90 and 130 pounds and possess pound-for-pound strength significantly greater than an adult human male. Their muscles contain a higher proportion of fast-twitch fibers than human muscle, giving them explosive speed and gripping power, capable of tearing flesh and breaking bones with terrifying ease. Chimpanzees reach sexual maturity around age 8, at which point male aggression increases dramatically as they compete for dominance. In the wild, male chimpanzees engage in brutal territorial conflicts and establish dominance through violence that can result in severe injuries or death. Captive chimpanzees raised as human children often become extremely dangerous as they mature, unable to integrate into chimpanzee society, but possessing none of the social inhibitions that govern human behavior. According to the investigation's reconstruction, Ashcroft had been preparing food in the kitchen at approximately 2:45 p.m. when the chimpanzee entered and attempted to take items from the counter. She had reportedly been attempting to establish boundaries with the increasingly dominant animal over recent weeks, though such efforts are extremely difficult to manage safely with mature male chimpanzees, whose strength makes physical discipline ineffective. Physical evidence suggested she refused to give the chimpanzee something he wanted, possibly food from the counter or a specific item he had demanded. The animal's reaction was immediate and explosive. The chimpanzee grabbed Ashcroft's arm with enough force to fracture the bone, his powerful grip crushing the forearm. He used his extraordinary strength to pull her off balance, dragging her to the floor. As she fell, the chimpanzee attacked her face and neck with savage intensity. His powerful hands tore at her face while his teeth delivered crushing bites. The attack focused on areas typical of chimpanzee aggression, the face and throat, with the animal using both his hands and jaws as weapons. The assault was frenzied and sustained, with the chimpanzee inflicting catastrophic facial trauma and likely tearing through major blood vessels in her neck. The pattern of injuries was consistent with documented cases of chimpanzee attacks, which are often chaotic and extraordinarily violent rather than targeted or precise. The chimpanzee eventually ceased the attack and retreated to another room, where he remained until authorities arrived hours later. A neighbor who heard unusual sounds from the property investigated several hours later, concerned by the uncharacteristic silence following a period of aggressive vocalizations. Looking through a window, he discovered Ashcroft's body in the kitchen and immediately contacted emergency services from his vehicle. Emergency services arrived within 30 minutes, but she had been dead for hours. The chimpanzee was tranquilized and removed by a specialized primate rescue team equipped to handle aggressive adult males. The investigation confirmed illegal ownership and noted that the attack pattern was consistent with documented cases of captive chimpanzee aggression against owners. Given the severity of the injuries, investigators believe Ashcroft likely lost consciousness quickly from blood loss and shock. The animal was transferred to a sanctuary equipped to handle aggressive adult males, where he remains in a specialized facility designed for chimpanzees that cannot be integrated into social groups.